Determined to solve the Middle East conflict, President Obama says next stop will be a global summit if the latest proximity talks fail. With Arab countries backing the Palestinians' return to indirect negotiations with the Israelis under US mediation, what are the chances of success this time round, and could there be a breakthrough? This is Inside Story. Hello there and welcome to today's programme. I'm Nick Clark. Reviving talks, albeit indirect in nature. Over the last few days, the US has managed to convince the Palestinians to resume indirect peace talks with Israel. Peace negotiations have been on hold, of course, since 2008. Ever since then, the US has struggled to get the two sides together again. The indirect talks are scheduled to begin this week, conducted by George Mitchell, President Obama's special envoy to the region, and they could last about 4 months. Despite her refusal to comment on any US-made guarantees, the Secretary of State Hillary Clinton has announced the talks will go ahead.
The resumption of talks is absolutely essential for the progress we seek toward a two-state solution. We will be starting with proximity talks next week. Senator Mitchell will be going back to the region.
Meanwhile, in recent hours, Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu has met with Egyptian President Mubarak in Sharm el-Sheikh on Monday to discuss the upcoming talks, only a couple of days after the Arab states on Saturday endorsed them. Plans to launch the indirect negotiations failed last month after Israeli plans to build 1,600 homes in occupied East Jerusalem were announced. But news of these talks has been met with cautious optimism from Saeb Erekat, the lead Palestinian negotiator, who sees a window of opportunity because of the different US approach this time around.
Settlements or peace, they can't choose both. They can't have both. They have to choose peace. And as far as we're concerned, what we have from the Americans today satisfied our requests and demand, and we hope that we will watch the deeds and not the words.
So to discuss this further, we're joined by Ghassan Khatib in Ramallah. He's director of the Palestinian Government Media Center. In Ramat HaSharon, Yossi Alford joins us. He's the former director of the Jaffe Center for Strategic Studies at Tel Aviv University and co-editor of bitterlemons.org. And in Doha, Hadi Amar, who's director of the Brookings Institution at the Doha Center. Welcome, gentlemen, to you all. Good to see you here on the program. Yossi, if I could start with you, Yossi Alford. It's hard not to go into these proximity talks with all the usual resignation, isn't it? Aren't they bound to fail?
I wouldn't say bound to fail, but the chances of success are certainly slim. Nevertheless, I think the very fact that Israel and the Palestinians are resuming some sort of talks is certainly a lot better than nothing. It's certainly very important for U.S. relations in the Middle East and therefore indirectly for Israeli-American relations as well. And they could perhaps serve as a kind of stepping stone for moving in additional directions. For example, Israel-Syria, which the Mitchell team is working very hard on to persuade the sides to resume negotiations there as well.
Okay, Ghassan Khatib, what's your view about this? Is this a process just for the sake of process, deadlock inevitable?
It's a risky process. There are high chances of failure. However, we're not pessimistic completely. I think that we all have to join efforts, Palestinians, Israelis, and the international community led by the United States, to try to get the best out of this opportunity. It is good that the Americans have apparently succeeded in making some progress on convincing the Israeli government on the issue of settlements. And now it is a good opportunity to try to get into substance. And I think that this is the real challenge. And the fact that this talks is going to be sponsored by the United States is a good sign, because this will allow the United States to keep an eye on the positions of the parties and on the level of flexibility of the parties and the extent to which the parties are consistent with the international legality, with the terms of reference, with the previous agreements, with the roadmap, which is all positive aspects of this process.
Okay, Hadi Amr, where do you see the opportunity lies for getting the best out of all of this? I mean, there are substantive gaps, it goes without saying, between the two sides.
Look, this problem has been on the table my whole lifetime, 43 years, since 1967. But this American president has been absolutely committed since his very first full day in office to resolving this problem. On his first day in office, he set out to call Israeli, Palestinian, and Arab leaders to move forward on this. In his subsequent days, he appointed George Mitchell, an Arab American, as his senior envoy to the Middle East peace process, and he's undertaken a series of more steps. Sure, it's been difficult. Sure, there's been setbacks. And if the past is any record, any history for the future, it will be very challenging. But I think the American effort is genuine. They want to succeed. And the other interesting dynamic is that because this is such a right-wing Israeli government, if there is progress, if there is progress, there really could be positive steps forward.
Yossi Alfa, what do you think about that?
Well, if there is significant progress, it's very hard to see how the Netanyahu government will survive it, in the sense that even assuming Prime Minister Netanyahu is prepared to make concessions, it's not at all clear that the rest of his coalition is. So this could actually trigger some sort of coalition crisis. I might add that it's my impression that on the Palestinian side too, there are hardliners and softliners, and certainly Hamas in Gaza is capable of exercising a kind of brutal veto power if it doesn't like the progress that's being registered as well. But nevertheless, if there is progress, obviously we should welcome it.
Well, that's it, Ghassan Khatib. There's a whole load of figurative landmines just waiting, aren't there, in ambush?
Yes, I think the political landscape and the reality in the two sides are not very much favorable to progress. That's why the peace camp in the two sides has a huge job of trying to make sure that spoilers are contained as much as possible, because, as Yossi said, things in Israel are not conducive to progress in the peace process, and we are afraid that if the negotiations will start touching on substantive aspects of the conflict, like Jerusalem, refugees, and other issues, then there might be serious internal constraints that might reflect itself negatively on the negotiations. That's why there has to be joining efforts between external and positive internal forces to push things into the right direction. Again, in the Palestinian side, also things are fragile and not easy, and there is a strong opposition to the peace process, as everybody knows. And the government and the Palestinian Authority here in the West Bank is supposed to show significant progress on many aspects in order to maintain its majority and its public support in order to be able to deliver in this peace process.
Hadi Amr, do you think it's right to say that Israel has decided to quietly shelve any settlement building programs while this is going on, that sort of faded into the background now?
On that question, it might be more appropriate to have the Israeli and Palestinian guests answer that, because they're more on the ground. But there is an interesting dynamic here as well, which is there's a new language in Washington, which as an observer of this process for the past decades I haven't heard before. We have General Petraeus and leading American officials talking about the fact that the need to resolve the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is in the American national security interest and in America's strategic interest. And what that means is that it's not just a side thing or something America would like to do just to be a good global citizen. With a couple of 100,000 American troops in the Middle East, there is a sense that that allowing this conflict to perpetuate under sort of American hegemony in the world it just undermines strategic interest in the security of American troops. So there is this sort of compelling American interest now, and a language about it that I haven't heard before, and that may add a new dynamic to the talks.
But in what sense do you mean it may add a new dynamic? Briefly, if you would.
I just think that there'll be a whole new level of seriousness, that the sort of the American military is fully on board in resolving this. That it's not just a conflict that something that an American president can resolve to get himself a Nobel Peace Prize. After all, this is a president who already has a Nobel Peace Prize. This is something that America needs to do for America's interest, as opposed to just being a global citizen. And that will create a whole new level of seriousness, not just on the part of the specific American negotiators, but the political context and economic context and the military context in American society in which they operate.
But Yossi Alpha, if Netanyahu is hamstrung by his politics at home, as you were alluding to just now, it doesn't really make any difference that there's been a change in language, does it?
Well, I think what was just said is extremely important. The issue of the presence of American troops in the Middle East and the linkage that General Petraeus and others in the American military are drawing between a stagnant Israeli-Arab and particularly Israeli-Palestinian peace process and the welfare of those troops. It seems to me that this is a key change, potential change in the Israeli-American relationship. When all those forces arrived in the Middle East in the aftermath of 9/11, the general sense here, and I'm sure in some places in the Arab world as well, was that this is good for us. The Americans are allies, we are allies with them, and this can't be a bad thing. What Petraeus is saying is this can be a bad thing. Now, Prime Ministers Sharon and Olmert apparently realized this and made great efforts to provide the United States with some forward movement in the peace process. Even if the Gaza withdrawal didn't end up so well, it was certainly an attempt in the right direction. It's not clear that Netanyahu has understood this. It is clear that Defense Minister Barak understands this. It's not clear that Netanyahu and the rest of the coalition appreciate this fact. And this is a key. If they do, then they will indeed be very forthcoming in this peace process, because they will realize its import for the future of American-Israeli relations. If they don't, we could see more tensions in the American-Israel relationship in the near future.
Hadi Amma?
I absolutely agree completely. And there's another dynamic too, which isn't strictly new, but is also important, which is the Palestinians are sort of participating with the blessing of the members of the Arab League. And so there's a sort of helpful regional dynamic and blessing as well. So you have a lot of alignment. You have the United States, the Arab League, the Palestinian sort of vision aligning on things. And I think Prime Minister Netanyahu has a choice. He's either got to take on America and sort of be resistant, or he's got to take on his right wing, which could mean some realignment within the Israeli political space. But I think Prime Minister Netanyahu's got a challenge here, because he's got to either work with America or work with his right wing, or convince his right wing to work with America, which as our Israeli colleague said, may be very difficult.
Well, gents, it's an understatement to say that reviving these indirect talks has been an uphill task. Let's take a quick look at what's happened in the last couple of months. In March, Israel announced plans to expand settlements in East Jerusalem, and this announcement, coinciding with US Vice President Joe Biden's visit to Israel, triggered strong responses. The Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas insisted the expansion plans should be scrapped before any talks take place, a demand backed by the Arab League. Biden also condemned the move, saying it undermined trust in the peace process. And shortly afterwards, Netanyahu, he visited the United States to diffuse tension between the two countries over the issue. But even then, Netanyahu was adamant not to make concessions on settlement building. And subsequently, of course, Mitchell visited the region in an attempt to revive negotiations. Ghassan Khatib, Barack Obama has pushed forward this idea of a global summit. If this was to happen, who would stand to gain from this? Would it be of benefit to any one side, do you think?
No, I think it will be useful for the cause of peace, because it will be a very strong driver. And as it was said, this is an important alternative that needs to be ready, because, you know, one of the defects of the peace process so far is that the international community is not providing any alternative to it, which meant all along that the stronger party to the conflict, Israel in this case, has a veto power on whether this process is going to lead to an end, such as two states, which is the vision of the international community for making peace. Now there has been a few ideas on alternatives in case this bilateral negotiations faced difficulties and failed to deliver its expected outcome of two states living in peace. Then there has to be other alternatives, such as the idea of an international conference, such as the idea that some Palestinians are promoting, which is to go to the United Nations and to hope for a resolution recognizing an independent Palestinian state in the borders of 1967 at a time when the Palestinian government will be ready with the state, with the institution building of a state, and when it will be ready for a state. Because Israel, I think, has been exploiting, especially right-wing governments, has been exploiting the principle that was held internationally, that only through bilateral negotiations things can move forward. And I think that having such alternatives will be an incentive to the two parties to be as positive as possible in allowing this peace process to reach its destination, which is ending the occupation, two states, peace, integration, recognition, etc.
All right. Is that a fair point, Yossi Alpha?
Let me address both of those ideas. The idea of an international conference is perhaps a good means for the United States to pressure Netanyahu into being more forthcoming in the process. But an international conference based on deadlock between Israel and the Palestinians in bilateral talks doesn't have a good chance of succeeding. On the other hand, I completely agree with Rassan that the idea of the United Nations recognizing a Palestinian state in a little over a year, when the current very admirable efforts of the Palestinian Authority reach fruition, is not a bad idea at all. It's probably the best thing that could happen to us, because it would reframe the conflict and its solution on a state-to-state basis. It would put the immediate emphasis on the issue of territory, borders, and settlements and security, which are the easier issues to resolve. And it would allow us to make some gains, even if for the time being we remain, and this is the likely outcome, we remain deadlocked on the issues of refugees and the holy places in Jerusalem.
Hadi Amma?
I like the idea of this global summit in tandem with the talks that are going on right now, that it's held out there. I like it for a number of reasons. First of all, President Obama has had tremendous success. I just came back from Washington a few weeks ago, where the nuclear summit was taking place, and a tremendous practical steps and progress were made at that summit. So I think there's some success there. I think there's also been success in having clear, useful language coming out of the quartet, the United Nations, Russia, America, and the European Union, and sort of building on that for a global summit would be great. And I've always felt, you know, I mean, if you know, even though my family heritage is all from the Levant, we're a really small group of people, you know, Israelis, Palestinians, Lebanese, you know, just a couple of million people. We're you know, just a percentage or so of the global population, if not less, and yet we take up all this airtime. I'd love for the world and this region to be able to move on and focus on issues of environment and poverty and so many other important issues, and just sort of put this to rest. So I think the global summit is great to hold out there. Of course, the parties will have to agree themselves, and so what some of my colleagues on this panel have said about the challenges of it, I agree that there will be challenges, but well, at the same time, I think there's tremendous opportunity there for the international community to get together, to speak clearly, right, with one voice for a vision for the future.
Hadi, I'm just going to jump in there. It's certainly an issue that we've been discussing here on Inside Story for many years. So if this global summit is to go ahead, Rassan Khatib, what pressure do you think the quartet could bring to bear on the parties that hasn't been tried already?
Well, a global conference like this will represent emphasis of two things. First, the role of the international community, which was absent in previous experiences to a large extent, because everybody was favoring the bilateral talks, leave the Palestinians and the Israelis on their own. I think that proved to be wrong. That's why the international community has to play a closer role in helping the two parties in more direct way. And second, a global conference will also bring the attention to the international legality as an important component and aspect that needs to be taken with respect and taken into consideration by the parties or by the third party in dealing with the ways this conflict needs to be solved.
And can I just finally come to you, Yossi Alfa? There seems to be genuine concern in Israel, doesn't there, that because of the Netanyahu government's position on this and what impact that's having on Israel's standing with its friends, with its international friends. You know, how much does all this come into play when you have to balance it with what he's got to do to keep his own political partners happy?
Well, the Israeli public is very keenly aware of the need for us to maintain good relations with our principal ally, the United States, and through the United States, perhaps with the quartet as well. So the Israeli public in the past has actually punished Mr. Netanyahu when he lost the election to Ehud Barak in 1999, precisely because the Clinton administration showed its displeasure with him. I think Netanyahu understands this too, although that doesn't particularly help him in dealing with his coalition, and he doesn't seem to be particularly capable of resolving the conflict between his need to maintain close relations with the United States and move forward toward a two-state solution, and Israel's relations with the United States. But he knows the public is watching. One other word on an international conference, and that is to the extent that it could bring the Arab League in and extract from it some beginning of the payoff promised to Israel by the Arab Peace Initiative in return for Israeli movement forward, whether with the Palestinians or the Syrians or even Lebanon, this might be more appealing to Israel. Now, President Obama has tried and failed in the past to get some initial confidence-building measures out of the moderate Arab states. But perhaps if he reframed this within a kind of a global conference, and if there were at least a little bit of progress between Israelis and Palestinians to build on, it might be possible to make some progress at such a conference.
All right, gentlemen. Well, I'm sorry to say our time is done, but it's undoubtedly a subject we will revisit. Yossi Alfa, Rassan Khatib and Hadi Yamma, thanks very much indeed. Good to have your views on all of this. All right, we've just got time for a quick look at some of your comments from past shows. This is what you had to say about the burqa debate in Europe. Anissa Rahman from Bangladesh said, as a Muslim by faith, I support the ban on the veil. In Islam, men and women are instructed equally to wear decent dress. In my opinion, immigrants should respect the laws and the culture of the country. But Fazla Amir disagrees. She says, being a young Muslim girl, I have complete freedom and my burqa does not stand in my way to success. How can men support the ban of the burqa, saying it does not give freedom to women, while women do not have any grudge in wearing it and are willingly wearing it? Okay, so there you go. Thanks for watching Inside Story. It'd be great to have your views on the subject that we've been talking about today. Just email them to us at insidestory@aljazeera.net. From me, Nick Clark, goodbye for now.